So if the few people who said are coming show up, they are just going to be late, and we'll start right now. So I won't keep you long today. Kocku promised to continue on our path to the intellectual history of animism to more contemporary times now, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for coming to continue these considerations on the history of the concept of animism. And yesterday we talked quite a bit about the first part of the 20th century, the first half of the 20th century, the end of the 19th century, where animism came into being as an analytical concept, but also was critiqued due to its colonial context and value and bias and so on. And like I said yesterday already at the end, we will see that at the end of the 20th century and in the second half of the 20th century, there was a change in the discourse on animism to some extent. And at the beginning of the 21st century, there was also a change in academic description of animism. And that's basically what the rest of the talks will be about. And today I want to talk particularly about the revival of animism in Europe and North America in particular, which is not just a revival of certain or a reinvention or a re-establishing of certain spiritual practices, but also a conscious naming of it as animism, which is quite interesting given the negative connotation the term had in the academic context. So I will try to unpack that today, and again, I look forward to having a conversation as well. And to introduce you a little bit, and maybe when people come in, they can just see the visual before I turn to the more analytical part, to show you an example of how animism in a cultural studies context today can look like. Let me see. I will explain in a minute what this is, but I hope it will work. Okay, let's leave it like that. This is also a still from the same installation, and it's called, as you could see, Burl Burl or Berl Berl in German, which obviously relates to Berlin. And I don't know if you know the Berghain Club in Berlin. That's one of the legendary dance clubs. And during COVID, it was empty, and they had it's a huge space, and they used it for art installations. And this is one of them. From July through September 2021, the Berghain Club in Berlin was the site of an extraordinary immersive installation by the Danish artist Jakob Kudstensen, Berl Berl, named after the ancient Slavic word for swamp, and also the linguistic and physical origin of the city of Berlin. and that's the name comes from, and the place is built on the swamp. The Burl wetlands formed more than 10,000 years ago and were drained only in the 1700s. Using old Sorbian folklore and spirituality, Kutsteinsen conjures up a world that is both gone and present. The Sorbian tree glyph, you see it here, this figure, you can see it. A three-headed deity pictured as a large tree links heaven, earth, and the underworld. It is an image of the living ecological system that constantly changes from undergrowth and fungi to water, ice, leaves, trees, insects, and sky. That's all from the description of the artist. As the artist puts it, I quote, "Burl Burl is a song for the swamp, a place for the undefinable, morphing, liminal, and mystical. Burl Burl mourns what is lost and embraces what is new. The installation," end quote. The installation consists of large screens with the visual artwork, like 10 meters screens. For the songs of the landscape, Kutsteinsen worked with the singer Arka. Arka's voice blends with the timeless soundscapes made by local amphibians and birds. To evoke the holistic experience of the landscape, the artist spent a year in the wetlands around Berlin and collaborated. He recorded all these sounds and collaborated with the Museum für Naturkunde Berlin, which hosts one of the world's largest collection of specimens. And he then used a computer program to work with these images and turn them into this vivid, ever-changing landscape. And a landscape like that, alive and changing, fungi that transform into plants and insects, clouds that merge with hills, sparks of light that meander through the dark woods, this is something that many people today would call animism. And as we saw, it is linked to the original term of animism from the Latin word anima, soul, breath, life, and so on. And in terms of this description, animism is a view of the world as alive and agentic, full of meaning and communication. And this is what many people today would call animism and or animistic. And particularly in what we call the field of nature-based spiritualities. Okay, what I want to do is give you a little bit of an overview of or use different examples of what I regard as an evidence of a revived animistic discourse and practice somehow in Europe and North America today, and just to highlight a few critical examples and then wrap it up in the end with some comments on how that impacts the academic study of these things. And if we maybe can get a better idea of what this spirituality might actually mean from a scholarly point of view. If we look at animism, I want to start with shamanism, which is a large field and an explicitly animistic, self-explicitly animistic field as well. It's also interesting for me in this context because it is one of the best examples of what I yesterday described as discourse communities, which means that many forms of shamanism in Europe and North America were inspired, or some people may even say created, by academic narratives. And that is very true for this neo-shamanism, Western shaman, however you want to call it, in the sense that there is one founding figure, not founding figure, but one authority in the field, and that's Mircea Eliade. You all know that name, of course. But the study of shamanism that he published in French first in 1949 was instrumental in shaping the whole new practice of shamanism. And Eliade was a genius in the sense of popularizing certain understandings, not only in his academic work, but also in his novels. And I mean, he wrote like 200 books or something. Right? He was very, very prolific, and half of these books were novels. Right? So he was in person already a kind of discourse community that was both a literate a writer, but also an academic. And what he put in his shamanism book, where he coined the term of the ecstatic trance as the access to a deeper layer of reality. And he somehow idealized that as well as a way to reconnect to the original homo religiosos, which we find in original shamanism. But we also can, because it is a type of a religious specialist, the shaman, it is also timeless. That's a problem with the phenomenology of religion as well. But it's also one reason why it was so attractive, because it is timeless in the sense that, okay, we dwellers of the European modernity, we are disappointed to some and empty, spiritually empty, and thrown into history, as Eliade would say. And there's a way out. And shamanism, the homo religiosus, really reconnecting to this is an option that is also open for people in the 20th century living under conditions of modernity and being on a quest for real spiritual experience, quite in this Nietzschean sense that I talked about yesterday, to connect with nature, with the powers of nature through music, through art, and so on. And that was very influential, this book. If you go to New Age bookstores today, you still find it on the shelves 80 years later. And many intellectuals in the 50s and 60s also read that. It's students of anthropology. One is Carlos Castaneda, another famous shaman academic. And if you know this trilogy of the Don Juan books, the first one was defended as a PhD thesis at the University of California. You see that this was a Bible of the hippies, right? And at the same time, it was a dissertation. So what is it exactly of kind of the genre that we're talking about? And then there are others. Later, you have here on the photo, you have Michael Harner, who's the founder of the Foundation for Shamanic Studies in 1972 or something. It's a kind of institutionalized spirituality. It's not individual. There's an institution that also runs like 50 years or longer. And he was one. He also has a master's degree and worked on his PhD as anthropologist, and then was initiated in the ayahuasca rituals, and then was initiated in the shamanic community of the people he was working with. And then he turned from being an academic expert to being a shamanic expert. And he coined this thing that he called core shamanism, very much like the homo religiosus. It's shamanism that's stripped off all these local and regional and other things, and this is just the technique to connect with the sacred or with deeper layers of reality. And that is true for basically everyone who's a leading figure in what then is called neo-shamanism, for the lack of a better term. Doesn't matter so much how we call it, but it's a characteristic feature that all of them have at least a master's degree, and most of them have a PhD in anthropology. Therefore, it's a very nice example for looking into how academic narratives about the past and about religion have been popularized and then taken into, turned into practice by a large crowd of people. And they are explicitly claiming the term animism, which is an interesting move. Neville Drury, for instance, simply states, I quote him, "Shamanism is really applied animism, or animism in practice." And end quote. In fact, the connection goes so deep that animism and shamanism can hardly be separated, as Jonathan Horwitz testifies, who founded the Scandinavian Center for Shamanic Studies in Copenhagen many years ago. And I could quote Jonathan Horwitz, the word shamanism has become overused and really very overworked. A lot of the time when people say shamanistic, they actually mean animistic, a perception of the world as it truly is, with all things alive and in connection. Animism is the awareness of our connection to the world that is the foundation of the practice of shamanism. These two things are inseparable, end quote. Michael Harner also calls animism, quote, the bottom line of any religion that considers the existence of spirits. And he draws attention to the fact that even modern physicists have often followed an animistic model of religion. I quote him once more. It is the sense of our unity with the living universe, the feeling that we are all just parts of that greater life, which is basic to animism, end quote. For Horwitz, it's also clear that because shamanism is a practice, animism should not be understood as mere belief. Animism, he says, for the animist is not a belief. It is the way life is experienced. All objects do contain a life essence of their own, and as such do also contain power. Following Carlos Castaneda, Horwitz thus introduces the term power in the sense of force or energy, Kraft in Germanic languages, into the overall discursive web. Quote, one could even call the shamanic rite making oneself accessible to power. So there you have a good understanding, and all the terms that come up illuminate the animistic discourse that is created in this practice, or this theory turned into practice. And it is no wonder, I think, if you give this strong element of claiming animism and shamanic practice, because the shamanic practice that we're talking about here goes back to the 1970s. There's a long tradition, and shamanism has become a kind of common denominator in many European reclaiming spiritualities that are working with animism. And shamanism is also a term that, like animism too, that comes up regularly in neo-pagan communities, in Wiccan communities, and it's more, if you call yourself a witch, that is still, in some contexts, it's very cool. In other contexts, it's not so cool. And then many people say, okay, I do shamanism, right? And that is a ritual authority that I'm not a shaman, maybe, but I'm a shamanic practitioner. That's what they, in a more humble way, say. They would not claim, because that has other issues. We can talk about that. But I mean, this shamanic practice is something that is a very, very common denominator among all these communities, not only in the shamanic communities. And it is also linked to all kinds of pre-Christian traditions in the Baltic region as well, but also in the UK, where this then also linked to Druidic and other pagan pre-Christian traditions that also turned into shamanism to some extent, but also in Western and Central Europe. And actually the Foundation for Shamanic Studies that Michael Harner founded has a worldwide network, and they work together with indigenous communities all over the world, which creates, again, a certain tension. I will come back to that, call that the double bind of animism later. But there's not only a simple way of doing this, but for instance, they sponsor chairs in Russia. I don't know if they still exist, but a couple of years ago they sponsored chairs at Russian universities for indigenous representatives to teach shamanism to the people. So on the one hand, this is a colonial, can be called colonial kind of, you all do core shamanism now. But on the other hand, you can also call it a decolonial move to some sense, to reappreciate the indigenous connection of that particular region and then put this into institutional frames, another form of discourse communities, obviously. So shamanism is one example I'd like to bring to your attention here. Another large field is environmentalism. And environmentalism is, of course, a huge field that has a long history and goes back into the 19th century, at least, maybe also farther back. But what you see is that the spiritual connection to nature has, particularly in the American environmentalist movement, identified with Henry David Thoreau and the American transcendentalists, has a long history, and also was linked to more political agendas. After Rachel Carson published her book Silent Spring, you may all be familiar with this movement. But what you see is in the last 20, 30 years that this spiritual and animistic understanding of the more than human world, as it's then called in this context, making use of David Abram's concept of the more than human world, is a quite strong element. And when it comes to various forms of animism, we can quite easily apply the table that Bron Taylor developed in his book Dark Green Religion, which came out in 2010 and is quite a corner or a core, not corner, a core publication in the field. Some people in this animistic field, some people give a more naturalistic explanation, coming more from biology, from the sciences, starting from nature's life force. We had examples already of that discourse. Life force without endowing it with religious concepts. This is just like Einstein, right? Is an example of that. More a naturalistic understanding of the nature as divine or animistic. Others present a strongly spiritual description that sacralizes nature. And there's one group that Bron calls Gaian earth religion, and that is also quite easy to find here, namely the view that the earth is an animated, conscious system whose knowledge and vital energy comes into contact with human consciousness in many ways. Consciousness is another term that is quite strong in that relationship. The term Gaia refers to the ancient Greek earth goddess who has been resurrected, as it were, by James Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis. This is a photo I took from the wiki entry on the Gaia hypothesis. And these are all entangled discourses in quite an interesting way, in conjunction with the Earthrise iconography. And it's all over the place, you know, the Earthrise photo. This results in a spiritual interpretation of Earth's intelligent system, which is clearly visible in this Wikipedia entry. But as influential as Lovelock's hypothesis is, it does not represent the main chord of this discursive knot. I just want to mention Erwin Laszlo here, who was earlier, and he was very, very much arguing the same argument, making the same argument. As an example of the concrete enactment of these ideas, I'd like to consider this woman. I don't know if you recognize her. It is Julia Butterfly Hill, who became a kind of celebrity in 1997, when she climbed a huge redwood tree called Luna. The Earth First movement had called the tree already Luna before. Julia Butterfly Hill, whose middle name refers to her childhood love for butterflies, would spend 2 full years in the tree. 2 years in which, and that's the longest tree sit in environmental history so far, 2 years in which she developed an intense relationship with Luna. Hill became internationally known, as did the spiritual and animistic experiences she reported. Upon entering the redwoods, one of the most impressive forests on the planet, she had a metaphysical experience. I quote her from her biography. "The first time I entered into the redwood forest, I dropped to my knees and began crying because the spirit of the forest just gripped me." Descriptions like these are a common thread running through environmental activists' accounts of their experience. The example of, I give an example by Bron Taylor, Reverend Fly. These are all artificial names, right? But Bron Taylor interviewed him during protest actions also in the redwood forest in Northern California. It's very revealing in terms of the discourse structure that I'm interested here. I quote, what we know about redwoods is that they sprout. They hold on to each other, explains Fly. The redwoods are part of this continuous sprouting living being or consciousness that once covered millions of acres. For Fly and his friend Goat, this is the original meaning of spirituality. I quote, "It is honoring the universal power, the flow, the power far beyond me, the power that I exist in. Spirituality is when I know what the trees are saying, when I know what my friends are thinking. It's when I and the people I'm with open ourselves to other energies or to a higher vibrational level. People call them all sorts of things, ghosts, fairies, telepathy. It has convinced me we are not separate from each other and from the rocks and everything else," end quote. So we have certain terms here for a discursive analysis: the nature, energy, consciousness, universal force, life force. These are the terms I would identify as contributing a certain meaning and have animistic connotations. And they are then entangled with concepts of spirit, spirituality, in this case also telepathy and other terms. Now, one could argue that Julia Butterfly Hill, Reverend Fly, and Goat are marginal examples and anecdotal to some extent, and that's what many people also respond to Bron Taylor's work in some. So is that really a trend, or are you mainstreaming the extremes here? And on the one hand, that is certainly true, but it's only partly true. Radical changes in cultures often originate on the margins, namely through actions the majority culture regards as extreme and considers difficult to integrate. What is more, it can be shown that these positions are not as extreme as they might seem, and that's exactly what I'm trying to make clear here, but rather draw on and extrapolate from ideas that have a long history. In this line of argumentation, I would go even further and claim that what we are actually dealing with here is a profound cultural change that establishes an order of knowledge about the planet in which humans are seen as embedded in structures of non-human life, intelligence, and consciousness. Dark green religion and nature-based spirituality should therefore be considered an influential global phenomenon. And this also resonates with these polls that I referred to yesterday, that if you ask people in Western Europe and the UK and North America about spirituality, then this is a huge, like 30-40% would accept these spiritual or new age, however we want to. The nomenclature is a problem, obviously, but these are these certainly are convictions and also practices that are quite strong, but we need to focus our lens differently to see that. And to draw that line a little bit further, I would also, I want to bring in the political implications than this has. Environmentalism, of course, is a political activism and action, obviously, but it is also in wider fields of political discourse that we see the work on the personhood of non-human agents, which is a large topic I will come back to tomorrow. But let me bring in this example from August 2019. And you can probably all read the first part too. I can only read the second part in Icelandic. In August 2019, a ceremonial funeral was held for Okjökull, which was the first glacier in Iceland to be declared dead. The glacier was officially declared dead in 2014. We also have here as the amount of coal dioxide. What's the English again? CO2. Yeah, in the word. Anyway, the glacier was officially declared dead in 2014 when it was no longer thick enough to move. For about 700 years, Okjökull has lived as a glacier, but now only a small patch of ice is left on top of a volcano. More than 100 people attended the ceremony, including Prime Minister Karin Jakobsdottir, Environmental Minister Gudmundur Ingi Gudbrandsson, and former Irish President Mary Robinson. These are not small candidates. There were readings, speeches, a moment of silence, and the placing of this memorial plaque. As a letter to the future, the English translation on the plaque reads, as you can see, "This monument is to acknowledge that we know what is happening and what needs to be done. Only you know if we did it." Oddur Sigurdsson is a glaciologist at the Icelandic Meteorological Office who pronounced Okjökull's death in 2014. I quote him, "The oldest Icelandic glaciers contain the entire history of the Icelandic nation," he points out. "We need to retrieve that history before they disappear. Climate change and the mass extinction of species have brought forth the new phenomenon of environmental grief. Okjökull's passing on is only one of many examples. As Sigurdsson's statement makes clear, the emotional work of grief in Iceland is linked to an act of commemoration and the glacier's integration into national history. The presence of high political representatives at the ceremony underscores the importance of this ritual for national identity and the building of historical narratives. Disappearing, Okjökull became a national monument and a marker of Icelandic identity, a reminder of a heritage that had vanished. Julie Cruikshank, in her analysis of local knowledge, colonial encounters, and social imagination and nature culture discourses in northwestern Canada and Alaska, also looks at the importance of glaciers as agential elements of landscapes that entangle humans and non-humans in a complex way. The book's question, "Do glaciers listen?" is obviously answered in the affirmative when it is approached through local knowledge. It is a negotiation, and that's also what you had in the discussion yesterday. So this is a practice that we see in the local communities. It is the negotiation between these ways of knowing and the colonizing approaches to nature that drive conflicts about the ontological status of landscapes and questions of ownership. What Bruno Latour in 1993 famously called the Great Divide in European intellectual, scientific, political, and economic history, with a divide between nature and culture as well as human and non-human being an underlying force, is something that clashes in these negotiations, as Cruikshank notes. Across the Arctic regions, but also in the Alps and elsewhere, there has been a growing awareness of the special status of glaciers. glaciers seem to be a particularly agential form of landscapes, conveying to many humans that indeed wisdom sits in places. That's a book title. And coming from here to a more general conclusion, Cruikshank points out that, I quote, a growing body of research about social memory argues that landscapes are places of remembrance and that culturally significant landforms may provide a kind of archive where memories can be mentally stored. What we see here is a growing awareness of the price we have to pay for European philosophical decisions that cut humanity off from nature, whatever that is, and the agential networks that maintain life on the planet. Often this awareness is tied to a critique of colonial structures that not only exported these philosophical decisions, but also continue to exploit non-European societies economically, intellectually, and spiritually. Indigenous traditions from around the world, as well as Buddhist and Hindu traditions, are revisited in an attempt to decolonize European ways of thinking and acting. Treating landscapes and glaciers differently is one example. I will come back to this topic later. But before I do that, I want to make a jump and approach this discursive field even from a different point of view. Also a very, maybe even more popular one, and this is literary works. One indication of the broad acceptance of this order of knowledge that I'm sketching here is the fact that popular scientific and literary publications precisely addressing this discourse arrangement have become bestsellers in recent years. And here's a list of, we could talk about all of these and for hours, but I want to only illustrate my point with one example. And that is Richard Powers' novel, The Overstory, which maybe you have seen or read. It was published in 2018 and immediately became a New York Times bestseller. It was included in the list of the 10 best books of 2018 in the Washington Post and the Chicago Tribune. At the end of the year, the book was shortlisted for the 28-man Booker Prize. The Overstory is and won the Pulitzer Prize in 2019. The Overstory is a novel about reimagining our place in the living world, as a review in the New York Times puts it. The novel describes nature and especially the trees as powerful and animated. These trees are integrated into a communicational space that encompasses nature and human beings, whereby the trees offer long-forgotten knowledge that is decisive for the future of the planet. I quote, "A chorus of living wood sings to the woman. If your mind were only a slightly greener thing, we'd drown you in meaning. The pine she leans against says, 'Listen, there's something you need to hear.'" End quote. The novel is full of this language, and it's repeatedly referencing academic concepts in a very rich way. And Richard Powers in interviews also acknowledges this explicitly when he, for instance, says to Everett Hamner in an interview, I quote, "The book is indeed filled with what Bron Taylor would call dark green religion." So he did his homework, right? But in most cases, it's a religion without metaphysics, which is something that even the religion of humanism can't always claim. Tree consciousness is a religion of life, a kind of biopantheism, end quote. So this is a very clear example of a discourse community where scholarly concepts like dark green religion are picked up and then experimented with in a novel that is then also highly successful. And that is true for all of these examples, and if we have time later, if you want, we can talk about those. But just want to illustrate my point that we are indeed, there's clear evidence of a mainstreaming here. If we can call these bestsellers mainstreaming, we could also look at films or whatever. Avatar is the most successful film, and so on. But I want to leave it like this, and we can return to that in the discussion, because I still want to come back to the example in the beginning and talk about art, because art is a huge field that experiments with these different approaches to the modern human world in a very interesting way. And Burl that I pointed out in the beginning is an example. Here you have an example from Copenhagen at the Arken Museum, in an installation by Refik Anadol called Nature Dreams, which I visited earlier this year. Once again, this is a digital art installation that is very captivating. It is as large as, not as large as, but this is 7 by 7 meters, the screen. With the installation Nature Dreams, the artist Refik Anadol, who was born in Turkey in 1985, also works in Southern California, has created a visual and acoustic synthesis of the arts that impressively relates machine, the human, and nature. What we see here on this 7 by 7 meter data sculpture, as he calls it, accompanied by appropriate music, is the result of what he calls a relational process of becoming. Anadol started with millions of nature images that are freely available on the internet, and fed them into a computer program based on artificial intelligence, which he steered in a certain way, but which basically created these images by itself. And these algorithms created abstract and constantly changing images that exist only in the machine and yet contain the living fabric of reality outside the machine. And it sometimes also flows into the frame, as you can see on the photo. It's a very dynamic, sometimes you seem to, there's a nature photo there somehow from the internet or something, but it is highly abstract. And that is another example of this. And I'm sure you could also think of many other examples as well. And what we see here is a general trend, in the sense that there's a clear attempt to overcome certain binary perceptions of nature culture in particular, but also human, non-human, mind, matter, human, machine, and so on. And this playful rearrangement of these seemingly or allegedly distinct ways of looking at the world, or elements of the world, is something that art can do as nothing else. In literature maybe too, but in this visual art, there's even other ways of conveying this kind of knowledge and envisioning a new future of planetary communities. Okay. If I wrap up this overview, then I think what we can see is that the discourses on animism have been of decisive influence since the late 20th century. Academic theories and narratives have been taken over into other cultural locations, and from the arts and literature, but also from new spiritual practices, animistic discourses have flown back into academic discussions. And to wrap up this analysis of discourse communities, I want to end today's lectures with a few general remarks about the changing academic view of animism. What happened around the turn of the 21st century was that a number of scholars suggested new understandings of animism. One of them is Nurit Bert-David, an Israeli scholar, revisiting Taylorian approaches to animism and combining them with her own research with the Nayaka in South India. She argues, quote, that hunter-gatherer animism constitutes a relational, not a failed epistemology. This epistemology is about knowing the world by focusing primarily on relatednesses from a related point of view within the shifting horizons of the related viewer, end quote. The relational framing of animism was taken up and generalized by other researchers, such as Anne-Christine Hornburg in her exploration of, quote, other ways of understanding indigenous peoples' cosmologies than primitive, and her question of whether these ways might allow us to understand animism not as a failed epistemology, but as a relational one. This is part of what I call the relational turn in the sciences and the humanities. I will come back to that tomorrow. This reorientation in the study of religion was part of a larger conversation in cultural studies and anthropology. And you're probably familiar with these, including influential works by Bruno Latour, Philippe Descola, who was also mentioned yesterday already, but also Marshall Salins, Donna Haraway, Tim Ingold, Eduardo Viveiros de Castro, and others. It also has been recognized in the fields of sociology, economy, and law. For instance, Alain Caillé advocates methodological animism and argues for an attempt to make community with non-human entities as much as with humans, which implies to view non-human beings as quasi-subjects, as he calls them, or as gift givers. Such an approach can find inspiration in sociology of resonance, a fat book that Hartmut Rosa published a few years ago, also translated into English now, but also to Tim Ingold's notion of correspondences of all life on Earth. So there's a whole bunch of it's a little bit of name dropping here, but you probably know these names. So they fall into place somewhere. But it's easy to see that there's so much going on in different fields, and often they don't really talk to each other from across these disciplines. But I think there's also a clear move, and religious studies maybe can play a good communicating role in that conversation. There's a clear move towards new forms of aligning these arguments. And in addition to research on indigenous cosmologies, contributions from anthropologists and particularly from scholars working in the field of nature-based and pagan spiritualities resulted in what we can call today new animisms, or new animism in the singular. In this field, the focus is on relationships, or more abstractly on relationality or entanglement, as they address the relational meaning of persons and actions in a complex communicational space. Graham Harvey is one of these scholars of religion, who's also a good example of discourse communities, because he's also sympathetic, let's call it that way, with what he studies. People, neo-pagans, take him seriously as an authority that is both a scholarly authority, but also takes seriously their own spirituality. And he published this big handbook of contemporary animism. But that's the latest, not the latest, he did things after that. But this is a couple of years old, and it's like 700 pages or so. It's a real milestone. But earlier he was working on that concept already. And his definition of animism is quoted all over the place. And it runs like this. Graham Harvey describes animists as people who recognize that the world is full of persons, only some of whom are human, and that life is always lived in relationship to others. Animism is lived out in various ways that are all about learning to act respectfully, carefully, and constructively towards and among other persons, end quote. It's important to note that this understanding of animism is more than the recognition of life in non-human people and objects that are otherwise deemed inanimate. For Harvey, such an understanding would still be a continuation of European colonial hegemonic regimes. What is more, the recognition of life would be far too simple to serve as a generative concept. I quote him, "What is important is the mutual recognition of the ability to reciprocate, relate, and engage." So that comes on top of the recognition of life, or is more important than that. Let me also quote Eduardo Kohn, also a name that came up yesterday, and he's quoted a lot too in this context, anthropologist, Latin American region. He says, animism, the attribution of enchantment to these other than human loci, is more than a belief. Very much like Horowitz, right? But anyway, in embodied practice, it's more than a belief, an embodied practice or a foil for our critiques of Western mechanistic representations of nature, although it is also all of these as well. We should not then just ask how some humans come to represent other beings or entities as animate. We also need to consider more broadly, what is it about these that make them animate? The new and positive evaluation of the concept of animism has been controversial, to be sure. And one of the critics is David Chidester, whom I also mentioned yesterday already. Chidester argues that when relational epistemologies and other theories are applied to the term animism, mainly in the field of religion and ecology, quote, "The theory of animism presents a problem bearing traces of 19th century European imperialism, colonialism, and capitalism, rather than a solution for our understanding of religious engagements with the natural world," end quote. To some extent, this controversy about the usefulness and the underlying connotations of the concept of animism still reflects colonial hegemonic structures. One of the major characteristics of the new appreciation of the concept of animism is the fact that it has been distilled from religious and spiritual practices that have emerged in Europe and North America over the past 50 years. Emerging understandings of relationality and entanglement between human and non-human, mind and matter, or subject and object are in constant critical conversation with European philosophical dichotomies that have presented the human species as the isolated master of the world. Animism in this new constellation is part of an ongoing review of Euro-American hegemonic thinking and colonial practice. Focusing on relationality is an exercise in humility that is tied to decolonial efforts and intentions. It may be argued that Euro-American thinking is trying to catch up with relational and non-binary philosophies outside of its own intellectual heritage. Using animism as a positively connotated concept for this new appreciation of relationality in Euro-American discourses makes sense, but applying it to indigenous or other non-binary and relational thinking from other parts of the world can hardly escape the colonial setting that gave birth to the concept in the first place. Such a dynamic would also explain why practitioners in the Euro-American spiritual milieu are happy with describing their practices as animistic. These are the examples that I mentioned. But practitioners with an indigenous or non-European heritage feel less comfortable with the concept. And that is what I call the double bind of animism that we have to face. On the one side of this equation, the concept of animism has been heavily criticized as an instrument that legitimized European constructions of superiority and colonial oppression of indigenous communities around the world. As Walter Mignolo points out, I think that's the next slide, yeah. As Walter Mignolo points out, coloniality emerged as a new structure of power during the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, when Europeans colonized the Americas and built on the ideas of Western civilization and modernity as the endpoints of historical time. Europe was constructed as the center of the world and the pinnacle of evolution. Mignolo calls coloniality the darker side of Western modernity, a complex matrix of power driven by Christian theology, emerging in the 15th century and lasting through the late 20th century and the hegemony of neoliberalism. Mignolo argues that at the beginning of the 21st century, coloniality is coming to an end, as it is challenged by de-Westernization on the one hand and by decoloniality on the other. Decoloniality establishes understandings of modernity that are disentangled from the colonial matrix of power and imagine global futures in which human beings and the natural world are no longer exploited for the sake of capitalist wealth accumulation. The other side of the equation reveals animism's double bind. The renewed appreciation of the concept of animism at the turn of the 21st century is taking place in Europe and North America, hence exactly in those cultural spaces where the colonial origin of the concept is located. It still is tied to the darkest side of Western modernity, but it differs from European colonial hegemony in its attempt to critically overcome the very binaries that made European coloniality possible, both with regard to humans and to the more than human world. From this perspective, animism is a mode of critique of coloniality. Eduardo Viveiros de Castro makes a similar point in his history of multinatural perspectivism in Amazonia. The challenge is to turn the eminently colonial science into a vehicle for what he calls permanent decolonization of thought, by building into it a disorientating capacity to approach a radically multi-perspectival or decentered world. Bruno Latour identifies yet another element of this animism's double bind. I quote, "One of the great enigmas of Western history is not that there are still people naive enough to believe in animism, but that many people still hold the rather naive belief in a supposedly de-animated material world," in quotation marks. And this is the case at the very moment when scientists are multiplying the agencies in which they and we are more and more implicated every day, end quote. While the colonial legacy of the idea of animism should caution us to apply it as a generic concept to a particular type of religion, its revival in Euro-American discourse at the turn of the 21st century, as at least in my analysis, is a subversive attempt to decolonize the hegemonic tradition that constructed European, which is white, male humans, as detached from the rest of planetary life and as the pinnacle of evolution and creation. So, as a conclusion, I want to quote for today, I want to quote David Haberman's study of stone veneration in India. Stone veneration is the lowest level of animism, right, in 19th century evaluations. Trees, okay, birds, okay, but stones, bad, right? So he published in 2020 his wonderful book, Loving Stones, making the impossible possible in the worship of Mount Govardhan in India. And he ends his book with this quote, "Whether it be with a mountain, Govardhan, a river, Yamuna, or a forest, Vrindaban, or the land itself, Braj, all loving interaction is an opportunity to experience the sacred, blissful quality of life from which egoistic exploitation cuts one off. It's all one, playing with itself. And the point is to participate reverently in that play with sensitive care and appreciative joy. To feel a loving presence in a stone, how wonderful would that be? Thank you.
Well, I would think there's certainly possibilities for many kind of questions here. So, do we have an eager show of hands or?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for this synthesis. It's really comprehensive discussion of so many fields where you find this revival of animism with a new vigor and new meanings, covering both what we consider religion and arts and all kind of creative forms of expressivity. Just to formulate a question, there is also a new trend of studying fiction. Let's take fantasy fiction, Harry Potter or whatever, from this religious studies point of view. I'm referring to the works of Sarah Hills Johnston or Dirk Johansen. Can be reduced to this concept of the religious affordance of fantasy fiction or supernatural fiction, and the question might be how to relate these artistic forms and religious forms. Is there some kind of distinction from analytic point of view? And secondly, how to relate the emic and ethic approach? That is mainly the discussion is on the analytical level, it is academic level. But on the other hand, we as folklorists, we do interviews with people, whatever they are. It is indigenous peoples or working people or professors, or and it can be discussed from the emic point of view. That how do you see that do these emic perspectives, are they strongly visible? Are they there in this academic discussion? How the two are related in these discussions of animism? So the religious affordance of supernatural fiction, fantasy, and emic and ethic, two questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, these are very. Thank you very much. Yeah, these are very good questions. They are also tricky, and depending on which field you are working in and which methodology you are working in, this is more qualitative research with interviews, like you said, or is it historical? There are all kinds of different answers to this question in that context. But it also there are recurring themes that come back. How do we study that in a meaningful way, particularly when it comes to broadening the community, in the sense that then suddenly there are talking trees. Right? How do you include that in your analysis if these are persons or agents? I will talk about agency tomorrow quite a bit, but these are important concepts there. How do you theoretically and methodologically include those elements in your work? And there's some. I don't have real satisfying answers to these questions. What I see is that there's a clear search in the field for, okay, we have to experiment that. And I work quite a bit with professors of art history, for instance, or contemporary art, and they try to include that. They write then, for instance, in their papers with the students, or they go somewhere in a museum and they have to write biographies of these artworks, of these museum objects, something like that. This is a different genre that comes up in art theory to establish the voice of these silenced agents in museums, for instance, and they're just as an example. And it depends a little bit on the context, I think. And the question of emic ethic is an important one there. But also coming from my perspective, I don't believe in that distinction. So if you think about discourse communities, there is no distinction of the insider outsider. I mean, there are tendencies that are and they are still differences in language, I would say. I would not call this amic-ethic, but what I would claim is that I'm writing in a language that I'm accountable to a different audience, which is in this room, right? Than if I would do a shamanic ritual, that I have different, or participate in something. And I don't believe in that I can be an observant only, participating only as an observer there. And these are, of course, tricky questions in anthropology as well. But if you accept that we are influencing each other in many ways, and together we constitute a certain knowledge, that my forms of accountability are different than the shaman's ones. Yeah. But there's still differences, but the differences are not distinguished by insider outsider. That's what but then we have to operate with different ideas, and accountability, I think, is one for me, one candidate for that. Yeah.
I have actually a question of my own that kind of relates to the second part of what you were discussing, that you were earlier mentioning that in some universities they've also sort of hired local practitioners to, and it was in the context of shamanism, and in Russia, I think you mentioned. And then there's also this highlighted debate on decolonializing and de-westernization. So, but I feel like much of the post-colonial debate so far, it's still like, it takes place still within the sort of the knowledge structures and university structures of the Western academia. It's sort of playing around with the system a little bit. It's not rejecting the system. But if we like went the full way of de-westernization, like if, I don't know, someone in Africa or South America, and we had them still establish higher education in some form of local, then wouldn't the end result logically be that you could have shamans as university professors, or what? How do you think of that? Would that be okay problem, or how do you relate to those things?
I agree. I mean that would certainly. I mean, we have shamans. We have all these. Priests and pastors and ministers teaching at university. We have a similar thing, only we don't call them shamans. But structurally, it's not a big difference. But pun aside, but what you describe is certainly a possibility, and it is also. It is easy on the one hand to identify some of this, what the Foundation for Shamanic Studies does, as very colonial. And there are all these, and I'm sure you're familiar with these cultural appropriation allegations, and there are even lawsuits in the US and so on. So all these questions that are certainly very, very important, and they are part of the whole picture, but they are also not the complete picture. And if you look into the more nitty-gritty details, then it's not so easy anymore to take sides in this debate, because you see that it also can go the other way around. And I mean, that's, for instance, it's well studied, for instance, with the Sami, and particularly in Norway, in Tromsø, they had their research center focusing on that. And the Sami neo-shamanism is a very good example of that, because shamanism was basically killed by Norwegian colonialism, and they were not allowed anymore to practice it. They were not allowed to to speak their own languages, and they were deported to Oslo to the kids. Yeah, all the things that we know from North America as well happened in Europe as well. And then one of the most, I forgot his name, but one of the most prominent Norwegian neo-shaman learned shamanism from the Hana method. So he did basically do core shamanism, which is what anthropologists are, plastic shamanism, urban shamanism, all so very derogative. But at the same time, this man was raised in Oslo in a community and was brought into Christianity and had to recover somehow his roots or whatever, his spiritual traditions. And then this offered a way to do it, and that's how he himself describes it. This was the only game in town, right? And then I learned that, and the idea is to reconnect to my own tradition. It's not that that I do what Michael Harner says, but I learn to connect with my own spirits and then learn the tradition from them and not from Michael Harner. So it's a little bit more complicated. And that actually then fed back into the environmental and independence movement of the Norwegian and the Sápmi in general, which is quite successful today. And that's part of this. Yeah, it's a double bind. It can have some decolonial effect, even though it is not innocent somehow. Yeah.
Yeah, I just as a short comment, and then I give it to Akto. No, I agree with the shamans and the practicing theologians comparison. I just didn't want to use it because I didn't want to lead into the example. But in a way, yeah, the comparison is definitely there. It's just maybe in the de-Westernization part, we could say that theologians are very much playing alongside the Western rules. So sort of that's could be the difference. But I'll give it to Atko.
We also have a shaman of atheism.
Yeah,
Many
indeed.
shamans of atheism in European universities, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. By now you have given us a really comprehensive overview of the development of the current status or state of things. But one thing that I think has not gotten so much attention is the concept of authenticity, which I guess some would argue is the core of the emergence of this new attention to animism. The idea of authenticity, which, for instance, the scholar named Charles Lindholm argues is the creation of romanticism in the 18th century. So could you elaborate on that? Why don't you give any attention to authenticity? Thank you.
Yeah, but can you explain a little bit more? Are you because authenticity is also very controversial, or a
yes.
term that is that expresses the controversial aspect of this, that this neo-shamanism, for instance, is not authentic, while the indigenous shamanism is authentic. Is that what you mean?
So what Lindholm says is that the concept of authenticity emerged as a result of the collapse of the old societal structures. Well, when people started to travel and they were not recognized in the other places other than their birthplace, and then being authentic sort of created a new currency that people could deliver. So in some way, this still is there today. So the more authentic you are, the more animist perhaps you are, and so on. So you get the point. So yes, that was my just notion. Perhaps it's not so much a question.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense, and I agree that I didn't go deeper into the discussion about authenticity, but I agree that it's a very important element of this discourse. Why I didn't go deeper into it is because I regard authenticity as a claim to authenticity. I don't define what authentic is. And it's like with religion, with other, I don't have a idea about what it really is in that sense. It's not a term that I can use as a scholarly analytical term, but I find it in the material, of course, all the time. And also in discourse communities, in the sense that when I did my research about neo-shamanism, I call it European contemporary shamanism, which already is a statement, right? But then when I talked to Amayon, for instance, Roberta Amayon and friends also, who studies the real shaman, the authentic, it's also part of an anthropological self-identity work that we do the real thing, right? And you study the plastic, the urban, the capitalized, the new age, free market thing. Yeah. So, and these distinctions are for me more elements of the discourse that I'm studying than that they are useful tools. Also because if you go deeper into that again, I mean, if you study the history of shamanism studies, and then if you read Shiro Kogorov, for instance, one of the major Russian thinkers, he wrote in 1927, I think, I spoke to the last living shaman in the world in Siberia. Right? So there was no. And the Russians basically killed them all. And he found the last one. And then later on, what is the shamanism that comes after destruction? I'm not in a position to say this is not authentic. This is not authentic shamanism because it was gone and now it's invented, like in Tuva. Yeah, in Tuva, it's invented as a new state religion, and they had the festive, in reclaiming of shamanism with the shamans, and they all know that this is not exactly as it was done in 17th century, if we believe the missionary sources, because that's the only sources we have. But it is inspired by Michael Harner, by Michel Jade. We read the books about what do we know about how it was, but is it authentic? So again, that's for me. It's more, and that's also something that, particularly in the neo-pagan context, also many people don't care. If there is in Wiccan spiritualities, for instance, it's the same thing that happened. That Wicca religion was partly invented on the basis of academic narratives about witch and veneration of the female in European history and so on, and then turned into practice in the 50s and 60s. And many Wiccans today say, yeah, of course, this is invented. And I mean, there hasn't been a continuous veneration of the goddess in the form of Diana, for instance, in Italy. We know that, but who cares? It works, and we can still reconnect to some ancient Dianic understanding, and that's fine. But is it authentic? Yeah. So I don't know if it's really an answer to your question. That's how I approach authenticity.
Yeah. Thank you very much. You paid quite a lot of attention to art and artworks in your presentation, and you said that art would be the way to overcome that dichotomy between culture and nature. This very basic dichotomy what we have in our Western way of thinking, and what is possibly one of the cornerstones everything we do here. Mm-hmm. So what do you actually mean? Because when I listen to or see what this environmental or whatever artists do, they very eagerly use the the word nature, and I think they do it in very Western way actually. It doesn't explain very much whatever emic or indigenous ontology. It tells more about us, or what do you think? I just curious.
That's a good point, and it's an important point also that we still lack the language of describing that, which again illustrates how strong this conceptual frame or cage is in which we are, that we don't even have alternative names for it. And then Donna Haraway and others talk about nature culture in one word, for instance. Yeah? There's one reason why there are so many neologisms and jargon in this field. It's impossible to read it without screaming sometimes, right? Because they come up with all these new terms, but that is one of the reasons. You cannot speak about nature and culture in that sense anymore without falling back into that dichotomy. And that's also what many artists, when they talk about their work, are not always aware of. And then they start conversation with this like feminist or eco-feminist approach or whatever that reminds them of this cage basically, and then they come up with different terms as well. And for instance, nature culture is one of them. Becoming together, and all these forms, these alternative terms that are used, and I will talk about some of them tomorrow, is our attempts also to play with that. And many artists with that say, okay, but in the piece itself, there's no language that is. They would say this is a discursivized understanding of what's going on, but the piece itself does not use the term nature in culture. It is a way to bring them together also in this other piece that I talked about, the machine and the nature that was originally part of these images becomes something else. And being an installation that you physically go to and are exposed to is also a different way of conveying that knowledge that is in the experience. That's how they experiment with this. But it is true, as soon as you start talking about it, it becomes tricky.
Yeah, I want to say one last question.
Thank you very much. I'm interested in the animacy of artifacts. So what role plays animacy of artifacts? And this, what I learned today is all about great stories, great connection. So trees and maybe stones and other things, and they connect to a higher system. But what about the simple things around us in our households, and how to treat objects? I'm not an anthropologist, so I'm really asking for what role does this play in research? So an example is from it's definitely not colonialistic. It's from a short story by Kocku von Stuckrad about punishing a teapot who spilled a drop of hot tea on his naked foot, and he's doing this in front of other objects in the household in order to educate them. So this kind of animacy, which I have so I'm a linguist and I have to do sometimes to do with animacy also within Finno-Ugric studies. This type of treating objects in the right way and believe that an object has a will of its own. Does that play a role in research on animism? Thanks.
Thank you. That's a great question, and it's a good transition to the lecture tomorrow. I don't know if you will be there, but that's exactly because I think animism is a good example of a broader discussion that we have, and that has to do with animacy, or I would say agency of objects, and the whole concept of agency is crucial in that context, and that we can take what we've seen in animism, we can take into a different direction, more talking about personhood, where it's also legal. There are legal considerations about personhood, non-human agency. That's exactly what we then have to ask, and there I would think are the answers to that question, in the sense that, okay, if we consider and conceptualize objects and as agential, there's another neologism I will introduce tomorrow, Karen Barat's subject objects. These are not objects, these are also subjects, like the teapot, right? They do something, but not because they have free will. So we have to change our understanding of what an agent, or what Bruno Latour calls an actant, another horrible new word, is in this entanglement of environments, basically. But what does that mean if we take these subject objects seriously in museums, for instance, and in other contexts? I don't know if that's enough for now, but it's certainly an important. It's a crucial question. Yeah.
Well, I think this is a good point to end today, and then continue tomorrow on. I remember it was on the relational turn and related topics. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for the discussion too. Yeah.